Hi, this is Holly, co-host of I'm a Fan of That. I'm just jumping in to let you know that my book, A History of Fans and Fandom, The Power and Passion of Fan Culture, is out now and available in all good bookshops, online and on Amazon. So please go out there, buy that book for your friends and family, and get nerdy and learn a bit about fandom with us. Thanks!
Hi, this is Vivian Asimos, and my book, Cosplay and the Dressing of Identity, is available for pre-order right now, coming out in September. You can pre-order it through the publisher's site, which is Reaction with a K, or through any major book retailers and on Amazon. So go pre-order! Thanks!
Woo! Hello, and welcome to I'm a Fan of That, a podcast about all things fandom, told through objects, stories, and studies, with a bit of silliness thrown in along the way. Your hosts on this journey are Dr. Vivian Asimos, public anthropologist and pop culture academic, and me, pop culture writer and journalist, all-round enthusiast, Holly Swinyard. Join us as we deep dive into the wonderful and wacky world of fan culture, its history, the people who make it up, and the way we look at this ever-growing part of our society. Fair warning, we may well talk about some adult themes, use some adult language, and possibly get a bit nerdy about the whole thing. You have been warned.
Hello and welcome to I'm a Fan of That, the show where we talk about the wonderfully complicated world of fandom through the objects we love. I am Vivian Asimos.
And I'm Holly Swinyard.
And today, we do not have an object, but instead we have a person. We have a tabletop role-playing game player, actual player, designer, streamer, voice actor, and many, many other things. We have Nathan Blades.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I am your androgynous android game show host, Nathan Blades, tabletop RPG designer, streamer, voice actor, and general internet nerdy. Well, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure
Very
to have
nice.
you. It's going to be great.
How are you doing?
I'm good. It is a standardly overcast Friday morning in Manchester, so I am primed. I'm primed for the day, and very ready to. I mean, a lot of this podcast is about, oh man, I have this fascination or obsession with a creative pop culture topic, and tabletop RPGs are very much that for me. So you're giving me an excuse to gush about my current obsessions, and I love that for both of us.
I'm literally so excited because I don't get to talk about tabletop enough on this show, and as somebody who marginally works in the industry, I guess, touch my toe in the edge. It's quite nice to be able to actually have a moment to chat tabletop and also find out about new stuff, because obviously there is so much going on and it's hard to keep up. So.
Endlessly.
Yeah, it's been like a year since we've talked about it, because our very first episode was the D20, and then I don't think we really talked about it since.
No, because we talked about it because of everything that was going on with Wizards of the Coast and all that nonsense. That was the reason we decided to do it. But it's been a while. Yeah.
It's been a while. So I'm very happy. So I think a really fun way might be to get into it is for you to kind of share about how you started kind of getting into the industry and kind of what led you on your path and all that.
I would love to go and talk about how I got into tabletop. I got into playing tabletop RPGs in sixth form, so I would have been about 17 for those in the US. A friend of mine wanted to play GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system.
What a way to get into it.
Yes, it is. Without going into the finer details, it is a very complicated, hyper-granular tabletop RPG, which is quite inaccessible. I recently looked through one of my first character sheets a little while ago, and it is very funny. And maybe if there's time in the podcast later, we'll talk about that. Quite complicated game. And then I didn't play for a while. And then in university, kind of making friends there, I got to play Dungeons and Dragons 3rd edition. I had a good time with that, playing with different people. And then stopped playing tabletop RPGs again. And then by the time in my kind of like settled into my career adulthood, moved cities to Manchester from London, and again trying to kind of make nerd friends, and I got into playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And around that time, the actual play podcast, The Adventure Zone, by the McElroy brothers, my brother, and me. I was into that and was like, that sounds easy. I could do that. I'm gonna go, and I've been doing kind of like amateur, like nerd news podcasts with friends for a couple of years, so I could edit together an actual play podcast. That will be fun. And started playing a game called Shadowrun Anarchy. Shadowrun, very complicated. Shadowrun Anarchy, designed to be not complicated, but the game is not written very well, so they designed it to... It breaks, basically. You can't run it
What
standard.
I'm hearing here is you really like playing the most complicated forms of tabletop. You play GURPS and then Shadowrun.
No, that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. All these complicated games previously, and then I moved to games that ran simply on the other side of it, I guess. This is a very long way of saying I played a lot of complicated games, and then when it came to running games for me, I just was like, what if I played games where the dice were simple, but the feelings were big? Because that makes for easier storytelling in an actual play format.
I was literally waiting for you to say you were going to play Call of Cthulhu, because that's the third of those ones that I would say is stupidly complicated for what it is. Like, how many things do you have to have percentage-wise on that game? It's crazy.
Yeah, I definitely play a lot fewer complicated games now. But yeah, that kind of process of going through the fire to then decide what was good for me, and then playing games that start sort of broken and you have to be a bit of a game designer to make them work the way as intended, kind of inspires you to be willing to kind of write your own games and get really into building stuff wholesale. And now I do all that and podcast on other people's stuff all the time. It's long journey.
It's an excellent journey, though.
I think one of the most fascinating things about tabletop games for me as a semi-outsider is the kind of communal construction of story, that no one person kind of runs everything, even though you have, like, you know, the game master or the dungeon master. Even they're not in charge of everything, because you've got dice, but also you've got all the other players that are also storytellers in their own right, that are all contributing all at the same time. And that to me is so complicated, but also really beautiful.
Yes.
There's this funny meme, I always love it, the thing of, like, you as a game master will spend hours crafting a story, and the players will either make it 100% more complicated than it actually needs to be, or they will break it in the first 5 minutes and do something else. And there will be no other option, because it's one of the things I love about tabletop, and as opposed to video games, and I obviously love gaming as well, but the sheer amount of change and human control and human influence that will just mean that you end up creating a wonderful communal story that was never necessarily the story you intended to tell, I think is just so special. And it's something that I don't really think any other medium quite manages to, even choose your own adventure kind of things don't quite manage to get it the same, you know?
No, the collaborative storytelling part of tabletop RPGs is the thing that I love the most. And that means that not all games work for me or my intentions. Obviously, solo RPGs can't do that. And there are some games that are mechanically designed to not really be a storytelling experience and are more tactical experiences, for example, and those don't necessarily fit. But yes, the collaborative storytelling part is great. That kind of like the best laid GM plans are quote unquote ruined by the players is definitely an easy mindset to fall into as a beginning player and sort of understanding how games mastering works. But the medium, I think, really shines when the facilitator GM or whatever is open and willing from jump to offer a degree of narrative control to the players from ground zero and have that always woven into the story you're telling together, because that always makes things so much more interesting. There are exceptions. Mystery stories are a little difficult. I'm a mystery novel TV show fan, and in trying to do tabletop RPGs that are mysteries, ones that are actually solvable as well, requires a pretty precise degree of control, because you've got to have an answer that makes sense and can be solved. But beyond that, opening it up for players to offer suggestions and change the story in interesting directions is a thing I am always fascinated by.
So one of the games I've always enjoyed playing and can get really into is Fiasco, because it is essentially just a mechanism for people to tell stories together, and the dice and all that kind of stuff. I honestly think you could probably do it without it being necessarily gamified, but it definitely is a good way of starting, and it's so much fun. I adore Fiasco as a game because you kind of have to set up those relationship constructions and all that kind of stuff. It feels like a very exciting way to build stories, and I love the silly settings there are for it. I love the one that's set in an office block, and they just go, "You're in an office. What are you going to do?" So you can either kind of literally have it be a sitcom, or the time we played it ended up as a spy thriller. Because of course
that sounds like a weird real life version of Offices and Bosses. There's Hello from the Magic Tavern is supposed to take place in like a fantasy world, and they have a joke D&D version game that they play called Offices and Bosses, where you're just a guy doing your normal 9 to 5 in an office, and you have to role play that because that's fantastical.
Yeah. I love Fiasco. It's got so many settings. Like we've done one in a submarine. We did one in like an abandoned warehouse. We've done a cowboy western one. That was great. That one, I think I annoyed everyone else because I decided to do every time it was my turn, I did it in noir detective narration.
Marvelous. Yes.
And everyone else was like, "Oh, now we have to do voices." And I was like, well, you don't have to, but I'm having a good time.
One of the things that really draws me to Fiasco is, I think, on the list of tabletop RPGs to play if you are interested in tabletop RPGs as like storytelling or performance, because it requests a bunch of things of you that Dungeons and Dragons, for example, doesn't. But also it's kind of predicated on every character in Fiasco being a bad person in one way or another. The core mechanic of it is whenever you are doing a scene and it's your turn to kind of start a scene, you pick another player to be in the scene with you and you talk back and forth, and then all the other players who are not in the scene vote on whether it goes well or badly for you, and then the scene resolves on your fate. So there is a lot of really leaning into being a complicated, difficult, and messy person, because the story on the other end of it is much juicier, and actually in a way that's a good way to get the other players to like vote for you. I think it describes itself as like a Coen Brothers movie simulator, which I think is pretty accurate. Yeah.
I'm wondering if anyone's done a live play, like an actual play of Fiasco, because I would love to watch that. I would love to do that. Maybe we should do that. Oh no, I don't need more podcast ideas.
To another podcast.
No.
I have done an actual play of that before. I mentioned previously when I was like, I could do a podcast. It was called The Talent Agency, mostly in Shadowrun Anarchy, but I wanted to kind of try out lots of different, especially cyberpunk themed systems. There were not that many cyberpunk or like modern setting games that were popular at the time when I started recording that, and so Fiasco was one of them. We did a board game that's like making up a news station. I think it's called the News at 11. So we kind of made up a bunch of headlines, and then after we did that, we then played Fiasco with a setting that was characters in the news station, so we continued being the reporters in that previous like little board game warm-up thing to then do the story, and it worked really well. Fiasco works great as an audio drama.
The other one I like, and there's a couple of different versions of it, and it is Ding Ding, Ollie mentions their special interest, is Cut Down Cthulhu, which essentially you give one slip of paper, you write your name in, you then write your character's job and a tiny bit of information about it, and you get like 3 dice, and that's it. 3d6s for different things, and you may or may not get a weapon depending on whether your game master facilitator is kind, and that's great because that is essentially just, again, it's just communal storytelling, because you aren't beholden to the dice particularly. You can kind of say you want to do something, or you want to look, there is less kind of, particularly with something like Call of Cthulhu in general, which is stupidly complicated. It's a really great way to just be like, let's do a mystery, scary, spooky story and see where it takes us, because it isn't so prescribed as, say, like a crime thriller or, it's Cthulhu, right? There's a big monster somewhere. But yeah, I like those ones, the sort of cut down versions, and I feel Fiasco is a sort of more, I don't want to say structured, but of that kind of cut down idea where it's like, we don't need much. Let's just go for it,
Is there really any massive difference when in this kind of storytelling construction that happens with tabletop games, is there a big difference, do you feel, between doing that for fun with your friends and then doing that on mic with the knowledge that there's this inbuilt audience that will be listening to it and reacting to it?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. So, like, I'll put this as politely as I can. Making art is inherently punk rock, and anybody can make art, and everybody should have a go at making art if they think it was interesting, would want to try. This is separate from the process of knowing all the techniques and practice to be good at making art. And we are in an environment where there are very professionally produced shows, TV shows even, you know, they have a camera crew and makeup and editing and the soundtrack, and people will watch them and be like, this is amazing. I also love Dungeons and Dragons and my friends do as well. We should totally record a podcast of just us being friends and it will be listenable. Unfortunately, that is not very often the case. And that's fine. Ultimately, I say this so people don't go and get into tabletop RPGs because they've watched Matt Mercer do it and then be sad that their kitchen table doesn't automatically bippity-boppity-boo have a bunch of professional voice actors in full outfits. Because ultimately, you are making audio drama or TV, live TV even if you are streaming, and that requires a number of techniques to be able to be at an entertaining, watchable standard. And some people will take that idea and be like, oh, that's gatekeeping. I don't mean that. It's just, yeah, there is I encourage everybody to go through the process. If you enjoy it, if that like fires a hunger in you and you want to do that a lot, then that is the time to start learning them techniques, baby, advancing the game.
And because actually everyone's going to start somewhere, and so there is no such thing. I'm going to be honest, I think in art there really isn't so that gatekeeping is you have to be specifically doing it. But I think with this, people, if you start doing it because you want to do it and then you get annoyed that you're not perfect straight away, then that's the problem. It's not I quite like a podcast that's a bit rough and ready. I'm not going to lie. I like it when I know that somebody's making it in their cupboard, because I also get to watch them get better and listen to them get better, I suppose. And I like the same is true of the actual play games I've watched. I like when it goes from some people who are just on little Zoom camera or whatever on Roll20 all the way up to when you suddenly see them start to get better and better and better. And I really enjoy that. I think there is something about that kind of, that DIY, that punk rock kind of version of making it. But I do understand that people might be disappointed when they aren't instantly getting 100,000 views on, their live stream or whatever.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah, enjoying that growth as a performer and, going through somebody's back catalogue and checking out their early stuff is definitely a part of the process. I was talking about my early podcast. What I currently do is that I am the voice of Captain Oromar Vale on the Campaign Skyjacks podcast, which is a very professional production with a soundtrack and everything, and editors separate to the GM. Not for nothing, if you are interested in doing an actual play podcast specifically, have somebody separate to you who edits it, because there is nothing that kills an enthusiasm for doing a podcast like having to edit the thing that you spent so long writing and then recording and then having to edit on the other side. It's why I moved to streaming tabletop RPGs, because I hated the post-production of podcasting. But I still left all my old stuff up, because even though the audio is pretty bad, I think it does highlight not just me, but my players, some of whom had never played tabletop RPGs before, and as a result take really big swings narratively that I think is great and deserves to be preserved. None of it is cringe, right? It's not well made, but it's not cringe. I'm proud of all of it. Yeah.
And that's a good thing. Like, I think it's the same way I feel about YouTubers. I really love going back, watching back YouTubers' old stuff, and some of it might be problematic because they were 16 or whatever and they said nonsense, and we fully accept that 16-year-olds on the internet will say nonsense, but it's really interesting to see how particularly streamers, people who do game streaming and all that kind of stuff, or make video essays, see how they've improved. And I think it's so important because we live in a world of content, constant content in inverted commas, and people are really scared of making art that is bad because they need to improve to get there. And it makes me sad because I want people to make art that's bad, because otherwise they will never make art that's good. Like, I fully know that my first podcast I put out there is not my best writing. I'm very proud of it. I'm really proud of how we edited it. I'm really proud that we managed to put a soundtrack on it, all that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily the best thing I've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely things I would be like, no. But it's still out there. I still want people to listen to it. I still want people to get involved with it. It's cool, you know?
And then I think additionally to what Vivian was asking about the difference between performing off-air versus on-air is the interaction with the audience is also a pretty big part of it. I am, I think, a micro-celebrity in a niche hobby, but also I am still very aware of how I hold myself in public appearances, and the stuff I record and put out there is ultimately a public appearance. Not to get into the weeds of, you know, everybody can think of an example of somebody who was looked to be a paragon of a particular community, and then over time it's kind of revealed that that's not the case, and how people feel about and react to that is an important thing, and I'm never going to be that person. I don't want to be that person. I want to make sure that the stuff that I make, not only is it entertaining and well made, but uplifting in the ways that matters. All my stuff is very inherently queer. And I pride myself on being able to do that and be a voice for people in that way. A lot of people have talked about how I play Oromar, who is a pirate king who died and then refused to die and was puppeting around his own body as a ghost for a very long period of time. And how I played that character was a lot of exploring one's relationship and agency to their body, both as a queer person and a black person. Myriad people want ownership over black bodies, and Oromar is very much a story of absolutely not, you cannot do that. And people were coming back to me after the fact being like, I never saw that facet of my life represented in storytelling in general, and definitely not in a tabletop RPG actual play. Thank you so much for being willing to kind of broach that topic in a way that's entertaining or what have you. And all I can do is not cry, definitely not cry when people show up in person and say that they enjoy the things I make.
Honestly, I find it really interesting with like actual play, particularly when you see that some people, and I think it is kind of obvious in some ways, when people are getting into it because they want to monetize it, I guess. I don't necessarily mean it like that, but they want I guess there's a clout element to it. And seeing the difference, because I think there is a difference, and while absolutely there is, as you said, a difference between playing with your friends and playing on a live stream or in a televised version or whatever, I think you can kind of see when someone's kind of gone, oh, that would be a good way for me to get my name out there. And there is a slight difference in the love for the thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I don't think it is. I think it's a thing, but I feel like it's noticeable. I don't know if that's noticeable to you on that side of it, but it definitely is. I've always found when I've watched live ones, I can kind of tell the difference.
Yeah, and to be real, I think that's just the nature of being a public performing artist. I think if you were a musician, similarly, you will do gigs that you do not have passion for, but the number of people there or the pay is good enough where you're like, well, I'm going to do a thing that I wouldn't normally do because it will be exposure or help cover a paycheck. And actual play, unfortunately, is also that space. I won't play Dungeons and Dragons for free. Like, I'll play it, but you do have to pay me. And I have definitely done streams before, not necessarily because I was stoked about doing that particular game, but because I know the viewership is particularly large. And I will still, because I'm a professional and will do my job properly, will still be a good actor and work with the other actors and make a good TV show. Because yes, ultimately, if you can't sell the fact that you're willing to tell a good story, people will notice, and that will be complicated. And these are all things that you don't need to worry about if you're rolling dice at home, and that is so freeing for you. That's so freeing for you. Relatively recently, I've managed to start a campaign with just friends off air, no mics, people who aren't performers otherwise, and it's so great. So great.
I think this is it. I think my roundabout way of talking about it was it's very difficult to see that if it's just your hobby, then I think you don't want people to get disheartened by the fact they're not these things. I think, and a lot of people, I have absolutely seen people being like, oh my god, my players don't like me because I'm not Matt Mercer. They don't think I'm good enough because I'm not, is it Justin who does...
Yeah, Justin or
trade
Travis
off.
They trade off, and then obviously you've got so many people, and it's like, that's their job. Matt Mercer is a professional voice actor. You've got people like, Brennan on oh my goodness, is it
on Dropout, Dimension 20?
Yeah, exactly. And he's a professional comedian. Like, you are not these things, and that's fine. And you should love it anyway. Like, it's so much fun. I worry that people, because there's so much of it online now, that people aren't seeing it as a hobby anymore. But maybe that's just because I have played, like you, I've played Dungeons and Dragons and D&D and tabletops in general since I was about 16. And so I'm kind of like, I want people to enjoy it. Just enjoy it at home. It's fine. You don't have to be brilliant. We never were, you know.
God, I'm still not. I think I'm still improving. I like to think of it like a Ryu from Street Fighter, who's like traveling the world to meet greater and greater fighters and lose to them, but kind of understand and improve in the philosophy of martial arts. Well, I feel that way about performing arts in general. I was never a stage actor. I don't think I have the head to memorize a script. I learn with every recorded and live performance I do with a new person. And I really value that. I think that is. I mean, I'm not there. I'm not at a pinnacle. I'm not Matt Mercer. So I don't know how much my advice counts for. But I think genuinely enjoying the process of learning new things about an art form every time you do it. And this is any art form, right? I like miniature paint as a hobby. And I've gotten better at it over time, with the same discouraging of watching people who are godlike on Instagram. Be like, I'll never be that good. Why would I even paint anything? But I get better every time I do it, and every time I meet a person who also paints stuff and I can chat to them about it, I learn a little bit as well, and that stuff is really valuable, I think.
And I'm a cosplayer, as we've talked about off air, but I do that, and for me, every time I meet somebody who I know has competed at a higher level than me, because I have in the past and I'm planning to go back to competitive cosplay, or just somebody who I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing, I want to stand there and just be like, how? Please tell me how. And I worry, I see so many young creators who are like, but I'm never going to be this good. And I'm like, that picture is massively photoshopped. I don't think that looks like that. Please just keep going. Oh, I don't have the numbers. And keep art for art's sake, guys. Come on.
Although it's always really interesting, because when I was doing the cosplay research, I had those people that I talked to. And then I also had people that were like, oh, I really curate my Instagram to make sure it doesn't get too big. Like, I don't want to get a certain number, like, more than that, because then that starts to bring in the pressure and the outside effects and often much more negative comments and things like that. Yeah. So they'll actively try to keep their social media numbers low.
I find it very interesting, because actually when I spoke to the Stupendium for my book plug, they were saying exactly the same thing as you. They basically, like, every time I do a video, every time I work with another creator, every time I work with another animator, another musician, I am learning from them. And I started out in this place of looking at what I was doing and being like, oh my god. And I love the fact that creators who I don't necessarily mean in a professional sphere, but like people who are making what platform they have a space for people to be vulnerable in is so important, particularly now, because I think there is so much. We've talked about this content, TikTok, Instagram, everywhere. And I feel like people are scared of being vulnerable in those spaces. Sorry, this went off on we'll talk about the arts train.
It's fine. I think it brings up kind of an interesting point, because, you know, you're amazing a list of things that you do. Do you feel a lot of pressure in that space because of all the different content to try to make things as much as possible?
A little. I think over time I have just resolved that I am happiest when I am making something. There are people in the world where it's like, I want to be a musician, and they're going to focus all of their time on learning how to make music and be really good at that. But I am pretty broad in terms of how I do a creative process. My actual day job is working in like broadcasting, so I have worked on making like web content and animated TV and a little bit of radio and things like that. And I was perfectly happy doing all of those different mediums. It was mostly the process of creating things with a group of people that really inspired me. And then also, I think, a very freelancer's approach to this space, where I am willing to try and learn whatever, if that's where the work is. You know, I don't think I necessarily went into deciding that actual play performance would be the thing that I would be stellar at, or my main kind of like source of income or lifestyle or whatever. I like that. I like writing games also. I like doing live shows and panels at conventions. I run game shows at a bunch of the UK conventions that I do, and they're also a lot of fun. But that's not a career. It's just things that kind of fascinate, and they all kind of loop into each other a little bit. I don't know whether I'm doing all of those things specifically for social media setting. Like TikTok isn't driving me to learn how to edit video so much as I could put an edited video at the start of one of my tabletop RPG streams, and that would make it cool in a unique way, separate from the other stuff I do. Yeah. Ugh, this makes me sound really mercenary. I apologize.
No, it doesn't. No, and
it's very realistic.
It is. I mean, as both of us creators in our, our own spheres, I think we can both very much relate to that. That we're like, okay, I'm going to try doing that thing next, because I never intended to write tabletop role-playing games. I've never intended to write video games, which is what I'm doing at the moment. But it's fun, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm going to keep doing it until it stops being fun, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's why not? I've always wanted to be a writer. I definitely have that's what I enjoy more than anything else. But that also doesn't mean I have to be one type of writer. I'm not. I never will be. And I think that is, and I also act. So I totally get it. This is the thing. You kind of, sorry, I'm doing the autism relating thing.
No, absolutely. No, I'm glad you also get it.
Yeah, no, but I totally get it. It's very much the that thing of like, oh, right, let's just try this then. Okay, cool. I've never, ever had a professional sewing or crafting lesson in my life. Everything I know to make, apart from leatherworking, which weirdly I did on BBC One, with very strange. Everyone should go and watch David and Jay's Travelling Tool Shed, because I was on it and it was really funny. Awesome. David Jason's a very nice man. So's Jay Blades, actually. Lovely human. Complete aside. But that, I wanted to make stuff, so I learned to make it. And I think that feels the same thing, is that you want to do things, so you're going to do it. And that, I love that. I absolutely love it. And it, yeah, sorry, I relate heavily to this, so I'm really good.
And to loop it back to tabletop RPGs and the space of actual play, I think in broadcasting, there are definitely people who are in higher level positions who do not necessarily know how the lower level positions operate. You can be a producer on an animation and not necessarily know how the animation is made. And that's fine, but knowing how the animation is made also lets you make decisions that work appropriately to scope. You can make change requests and know whether they are feasible or sensible and things like that. So I think about it that way. I've learned how to write or video edit and stuff because I know that makes me a stronger actual play performer, because if I'm working with people who are doing those things, then I know what they need to do, and that kind of back and forth. You can even tie it into, and this is looping way back earlier in the conversation, Holly, you mentioned the kind of super stripped back Cthulhu that lets you do kind of like a Cthulhu Mythos horror story with very, very minimal mechanics at all. And that makes a lot of sense. But I think a personal holy grail is game mechanics that super inform the narrative that they're doing. To talk a little bit about game design philosophy a little bit, if that would be of interest.
I love it. Do it.
My main thing for any game that I write, I'm always thinking about what is the specific action or experience that I want my players to feel really excited and invested in. And then I will design a game mechanic that highlights that specific part to make that feel immersive and carry that idea across. Especially in this instance where if you think of any particular genre of story, there will be a dozen different RPGs that can do that genre of story. So then the big question is, what is this specific RPG doing that none of the others are?
Yeah.
To give a good example, one of my RPGs, you can obtain my tabletop RPGs at theneoncaster.itch.io. That is theneoncaster.itch.io. There is one of the games I've written is called Heartbeats in Perfect Sync, and it is a love letter to every video game and anime that has a twink running up the side of a building with twin swords to slap the embodiment of darkness in the face.
Oh, my brain just went Roxas.
Yes. That specific kind of scene from Kingdom Hearts 2. Yes, you're already on the wavelength. And that game, instead of having a health, you have a dice pool called your heart rate. which gets bigger and smaller depending on how events go. If you are becoming more emotional and more passionful, your heart rate gets bigger and your dice pool gets bigger, so it's easier for you to achieve bigger and greater feats. If your heart rate gets too big or gets too low, you become heartbroken and immediately transform into a dark version of yourself and gain some new abilities.
It is Kingdom Hearts. I love it. Oh, that's so good. Sorry, Holly should not be allowed to talk about Kingdom Hearts on this podcast. We should have a blanket rule.
Fair enough. But that kind of informing the narrative of prompting people to act more emotional or more pulled back and tie that to the mechanics of the game is a thing that I really, really value.
I love that.
And helps the acting process because, you know, I wrote all my games so they would be sensible to do on air. Yeah, and the tying those things in is a thing that really sells an RPG to me. If there's a game mechanic in it that's like, oh, I really get how that could draw a story out of me and how the mechanics work.
Well, yeah, because I think Campaign Skyjacks does that with the Luminary cards.
Yes.
Where you can draw them, and it's a unique thing for them that they have these cards that they then pull at certain points in the story. Or if you have done something that is particularly, as an actor, you do something that encourages you to then pull the card to see what happens and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, that's it's really Campaign Skyjacks is such an interesting how it's made mechanically because it is inspired by both a band and a board game that the band made, and the board game is designed to look like it's apocryphal, so it has rules that are very open to interpretation and are kind of flexible. And taking that design philosophy of like ancient mythology applied to modern dice mechanics and then giving room to kind of interpret those rules and what symbols mean as a play works really well for a group of improvisers. All the other actors on that show are people with kind of big performing history, because obviously James D'Amato has been doing improv comedy and has been organizing that in Chicago for ages. Tyler Davis is a film actor and cameraman, and you can tell through how he describes all of his scenes. Liz Anderson works for Jackbox and does kind of those kind of improv comedy moments a lot of that space, as well as Johnny Amaro also has a big improv comedy background. And I came into that as somebody who doesn't have an improv comedy background at all. I know how TV is made, but I am not an actor or a cameraman. I just like telling stories, and I'm willing to learn all the rules to a game and exploit those rules for drama. Not to win, but for drama. And yeah, I learned so much from people who know so much more about comedy and filmmaking than me. And I guess on the other side of it, they've always been like, oh man, you've always used the rules of this game to make big narrative swings that we never thought of. And that kind of sharing of skills and working with people who know all sorts of different stuff to you has been so cool. I really like that.
My brain, literally, I'm just sat here like, this is like the good like creative fizzy space, and just being with other people and talking about this stuff is so wonderful. I'm like, do we have to do this on a podcast? Can we do this later? You know.
I was talking to Holly about this semi-recently, but I was recently getting into, I still haven't delved super into it for people who might yell at me, but I have been getting into the anthropology of creativity. So to put on academic hat real quick, there's a load of studies and things that people have done very early on in talking about creativity, and I think we do it colloquially a lot, is we think of a person as being very creative, and they are a genius in their creativity, and it's very not isolating, but it is very individualized the way we talk about it, of that person on their own just happens to be a creative person. But the anthropology of creativity relatively recently has been really pushing towards demonstrating and doing studies of demonstrating that creativity is created, fostered, and explored primarily through communal interaction. So it is not that one person is a genius and is uniquely creative. It is that they are well placed in a community that fosters that creativity. And I think that's one of the things that I think tabletop role-playing games is almost a great demonstration of the anthropology of creativity, of like, look at what happens when you get people who are individually creative, but you put them all together and this big blossom of amazing creativity comes out of all of them together.
Yeah, auteur theory is not helpful. I don't think.
I was literally thinking about that. I was thinking like, oh, this is why it's really frustrating when with movies or games or whatever that there's a lead, and you're like, except the likelihood is if they're a good leader, they utilised and talked with and worked alongside and were part of a group with everybody else, and it's not that they somehow magically knew how to instruct every single person. Like, that's not how a conductor works in an orchestra. The conductor doesn't make every player in that orchestra amazing. They just keep them in time with each other and make sure that they bring those skills together in one place. And that is what a good creative leader should be. So auteur theory is really frustrating because it's just like, no,
it's not one person. That's
no,
so
it's all these
egoistic.
people.
Yeah. I'm not about that energy. It also kind of hits the same kind of string as like, oh, all the greatest artists are traumatic and tortured. That's how you make great art. I'm like, nah. You got to be in an environment where you're happy and supported by other people to give you the energy to make even decent art. Like,
I always think about that in terms of particularly like Van Gogh and the fact that the best art that he made was when he was in a safe environment getting help, not when he was horribly depressed and like not coping at all. Like, the pieces we think of as him are the ones where he is at least in a safe environment and with people he loves and knowing that maybe he's going to get better, not when he's lying in a field being really sad and thinking about cutting off his own ear. That we don't that's not how people work. You don't create brilliant art. Maybe you're informed by it. You might be informed by things that have happened, and of course we all are. And also, I don't think there's a human being on the face of the planet that isn't traumatized because the human condition,
especially recently,
But that's the idea that we don't do it without help. No, crazy.
A good way to segue to talk about safety tools, if you've ever come across. I'm sure you as hosts have come across this concept who've touched tabletop RPGs. Safety tools have become in a much bigger prominence in the tabletop and especially actual play space. For those who do not know, it is a wide variety of devices to let all players at a tabletop table, whether they're the GM or a player, kind of highlight the things that they're enthusiastic to encounter during play and highlight the things they're not enthusiastic to encounter during play. And if any of the not enthusiastic things happen to come up accidentally, ways to navigate around that so everybody can continue to have a fun time. And initially that was, because it was something that probably people were doing that was not formalized because nobody wants to play a game about stuff that they're not interested in. But it was initially kind of like, oh, I don't like the idea of those because I'm being the fun police. I have to tell people to stop having fun because I'm not having fun. Or, it interrupts my flow as I'm telling stories for people to kind of interrupt. But it's had a really big sea change now with the perspective of it has changed. I think a lot more people, including myself, are advocating it as a way to highlight how to keep everybody at the table happy, and if everybody at the table is happy and safe, it's easier for them to tell good stories. And that specific framing of it has made it a lot more engaging to a wider range of people. And I think storytelling in general is just, in tabletop RPGs, especially recorded, has improved as a result.
I agree. As someone who plays a lot of horror tabletop, and is actually weirdly, I love horror, but I also am like a complete little wussy baby. And so we have the X system essentially, which is that you just, because we're normally playing online, just in a private chat, just a little X. That's it. Doesn't need to be anything else. Just be like, I just need to either my character be taken out of this situation, or can we just move on quickly, like skim over it. And it's not the most, we'll always talk about exactly what people don't want at the beginning because, safe, sane, consensual.
But things change, and obviously, like, you can often think something will be fine, and then suddenly when you're confronted with it, and obviously for tabletop, you're not just hearing about it, you're having to live it in a way, which can really change the way you might think about certain things.
My brain definitely just went to how many people who do tabletop also do BDSM, and how much does that influence this?
Quite large. To talk about this in seriously, to engage with this for a moment, there is an entire kind of like space specifically about erotic layering of roleplay or that kind of energy within tabletop gaming space. It is not a thing I have personally touched. I have done games that are about romance and having romance with other characters, but that is a super finite list of people I would be comfortable doing that with, so it's not something I usually do in any of my actual play stuff. But that space is definitely there. But there is also kind of exploring kink both in practice, like as an actual sexual activity, and as like theory via tabletop RPGs. There is a book called Honey and Hot Wax, which is an anthology with a whole bunch of different writers. Sharang Biswas is, I think, maybe the editor, or at least the kind of lead writer in it. And there's a whole bunch of different types of scenarios. There are LARPs in there. There are kind of lyrical, like letter writing games to other people, and they are all about sexual relationships and fetish in one way or another. It is a fascinating read. I will never play any of them, but it was pretty it was pretty interesting to kind of see people using tabletop RPGs to very frankly discuss sex and kink in that kind of way. There's also a bunch of tabletop RPGs that discuss queerness very specifically in its text. If you're into indie tabletop RPGs at the moment, you may have heard of Thirsty Sword Lesbians.
Yes.
A Powered by the Apocalypse game. Plays a bit like Masks. If you've played Masks, that's the probably most common game in that genre. It's that, but you're all lesbian sword fighters. That's the game. You know, there are specific rules about flirting. That experience is pretty textually tight in the experience it wants and the audience that it's for. I quite like games that are about queerness, but are not necessarily about romantic or sexual relationships, because there is so much more to queer culture as a whole than just who you fucking.
I'm shocked. What?
Yeah,
oh my god!
But there are surprisingly few actually games that are kind of broach that as a thing. I am writing one at the moment. I guess plug for the future. And I don't think I've talked about this publicly in many places, so you get an exclusive. Next big RPG I'm writing is called City of Espers. The world has psychics, and unfortunately they are considered to be like a minority class, so a lot of people, upon waking to their psychic powers, have had to leave whatever lives they've had behind and emigrate to Zena City, where psychics are loved and adored. And upon arriving there, you form a house, like a drag or ballroom house, and get into essentially sport battles with other groups of espers for fun and clout. And then there's a large thing about, discussion of found family, power through being an artist in various ways, the psychic but also pretty literal connection to your community and how your community fuels you. And all of that, I think, is incredibly queer, and none of it is necessarily about romance. And I hope that people would be interested in that when that actually releases.
I love that idea. I genuinely do. It's like I'm researching drag at the moment for a book, specifically drag kings, because I kind of felt like there's just not enough talking and things about drag kings, and that kind of discussion is so prominent in those spheres, in those spaces, and it's incredibly queer, but it's not about who you're having sex with. It's not about who you fancy. It's about the way that queer people interact with each other and the way they interact with art and all this sort of stuff, and just the community that's built and the culture that's built over the years. I find it so interesting, and that I'm very excited for that. That sounds like a really, really cool game.
Yeah, and most tabletop groups that I know are mostly queer found families in their own way, right? If you're playing Dungeons and Dragons with all of your queer umbrella friends for like 3 years, then you have made a found family that way. You don't play that game for 3 years at that length without caring about each other in that kind of way, right? So, yeah.
Is that thing about like, so who's going to be the traumatized tiefling this time around?
Called Zinthrath, or there's an apostrophe in there somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. I feel like I'm that person who's always like, no, I'm going to be a human and I'm going to be awkward about it. Because somebody's got to do it. But
character, species, or class that you play pretty commonly in games, I think, is definitely a popular identity exploration point for everybody, not just queer people. I definitely played a lot of characters who had he, they pronouns and then was like, okay. Do not recommend necessarily rolling a character to explore your gender and sexuality as your main thing on air. That is a great way to have your feelings hurt. That can get so complicated. I once played, without getting into finer details, player who was like, my character and my character's girlfriend are both trans lesbians as we are in real life. And then, because it was a cyberpunk, we're all criminals kind of thing, it got to a point where our community could be in danger and there was risk of life to them. And that was a really difficult thing to talk through, because she was kind of, to a degree, conflating the idea that her girlfriend being injured in the game is an equivalent to that kind of like threat on their community in real life. And that was a complicated thing to kind of talk through. Especially since it's not quite bury your gaze if everybody in the cast is queer. There is the threat to all of us as a thing, but it's the thing to genuinely kind of check in and be careful about and stuff like that. Having stuff that reflects too close without kind of having the discussions or cool down chats after play to kind of navigate that.
Absolutely. I do think it's very interesting to see that people can get so emotionally involved in this, and it's just like there is a huge amount of, it's very difficult. I've had it in just private games, I've not done live play, but I have some friends who do it, but when we've done games together and we've had it that me and one of the other players, our characters just went at each other. It was this full on massive argument, and like afterwards we had to sit down together and be like, are you okay? Like that was a lot. That was like a lot, and like I really felt it. I think we both did, and everyone had to be like, are you guys all right? We're like, no, we're okay. We're just gonna sit for a moment and just go through that, because that was like, whew. I think actually I had to end up telling her something that only me and the DM knew, because I was like, I just need to let you know that my character is currently possessed by a demon. Nobody else needs to know this, and I just needed to be like, you just need to know that's kind of where this is coming from. That's what's fueling this, but it's not real. It was a really difficult thing to happen, and you kind of don't think it's going to, but it does. You kind of sit there and go, we just had a 10-minute argument. That gave me real feelings. My heart rate went up. I'm sweating, the whole thing. It's real. It is real. It's very difficult to separate those things from each other.
You mentioning, like, you kind of revealed a story beat that was kind of kept secret. That's always really interesting. A thing I have experimented with recently, one of the streamed projects I'm doing, Chant of the Void Sea. It is a fusion of Blades in the Dark and Spire together, because why choose between systems when you can take two similar ones that do things you want and make them kiss? And I wanted to try and get that to be as communal in its pre-production as I could, without making it like a GM-less, no dice, no masters situation. Those games are good for what that means. GM-less games, as suggested, there's no game master. Everybody is a player and are co-setting scenarios and challenges for each other. No dice, no masters is a specific type of game rule system where there is no GMs, and instead of having dice, you have tokens. You gain tokens when something bad happens to you, and you have to obviously instigate a bad thing happening to you. And you can spend tokens to do a list of very specific things with no drawbacks. And so it's that kind of pendulum swing between putting yourself into difficult situations and then having this resource to get you out of it again. Very focused on just storytelling. For Chant of the Void Sea, I write the scenario. It's kind of like almost a play set, rather than a linear adventure. Here's some locations, here's some characters, here's some props you're probably going to find. I will remove a couple things from that, so as it's not fully without surprises, and then I will give that scenario to all of my players and be like, this is what the scenario is going to be. Feel free, if you want to add any scenes or characters or props that you also want included, to this document that we can all see, and then when we play it, we can all communally work together to go and hit the beats that we're all interested in and want to see. And that has worked actually really well. It has been really, really cool knowing when specific people want to make big swings for the fences, and you're like, and I'm going to prepare all of that for you. I've got tokens for you. I've got a music track for the scene that that you said you wanted to include, and you don't get that if you don't say. And yeah, that can be really exciting to explore when everybody is kind of aware of what everybody else is shooting for, and then being able to actually land that. And there are still surprises because the dice can do what they want. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of takes out, like, because I think a lot of people, there's this idea of spoilers, and it's like, actually, the story is still good, even if you kind of know what's going to happen, because you still get to see it and see it play out and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it's definitely, I really like that as a way of, like, particularly if you're doing it for an audience, I suppose. It's a bit more like that improv kind of thing where you kind of know where you're aiming, but you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to be. I'm thinking particularly of things like The Masks and Inheritance and what's the Jane Austen one where they do ad-lib Jane Austen stories. But those ones where it's more like you kind of know roughly the story you're going to tell and then you're slotting things into it. I love that. I think it's a really clever way of doing it because it's still fun for everybody. It's still fun for the audience. It's still fun for the players or the actors in those particular scenarios. I don't think Paul Merton would want to be called a live action player. Maybe. I don't know. But it's definitely a fun way of doing it. I really like that.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see how that would work in like an off-air game. It definitely works for on-air because, you're making TV and you're helping kind of refine that process. It means that the players, if there is a graphic that they've made or want to have included, they can just send it me and I get to include it, and that's also really cool. It's across all areas of the process. That's quite neat. But I do wonder what that would be like in an off-air environment. Everybody kind of just bringing whatever they wanted to the table as a group discussion of, we're going to do a hills and valleys kind of exploration thing, and I've designed a town that I wrote a little while ago. Could I put it in the game, please? And the GM's like, yeah,
that'd be really fun.
Yeah, because I can imagine that would still work quite well because you still do have, in essence, an audience. It's just an audience that is also partaking because you are in partly a storyteller, but also partly the audience of the other people's part of the story. So you do still have the audience that you're kind of crafting the story for.
Absolutely, and I think also that leans back what we were talking at the beginning. It leans right back into that communal storytelling thing, that actually it's not that you want to surprise the other players with this emotional thing, it's that you want to craft this with the other players to get the best version of it out there.
Well, like, it's what makes a good book isn't necessarily the sketched out beats of A happens, B happens, it ends with C. It's all of that meat in the middle that you skipped over in order to give the synopsis that makes it good. So it would be the same idea. It's all of that stuff that makes it fun and interesting as the communal storytelling. It's not necessarily where it's going, but how it got there.
I mean, I'd play
the journey is the story is the journey, not the destination, or whatever. I don't know. That gather sign.
This has been a wonderful discussion. I'm feeling very buoyed, I think is the right term.
Yeah, energized
very
to
much
create. For real.
Absolutely. Which is good because I've got to go and write 2 chapters today. So yay, But it's been really wonderful. Thank you, Nathan, so much for bringing this energy to the podcast and discussing art and nerdiness and all those kind of things.
Oh no, great. I am always overjoyed to kind of talk about the philosophy of performance, I guess. I should take a formal class at some point. I did, like, during lockdown, I was like, I want to start taking Chekhov acting technique lessons because I think that would be really fascinating as a string to add to my bow. But I've not really had much in the way of formal training for anything. And I'd like to, it'd be nice to work out to see what that'd be like. I would love to learn a new accent. I'm a voice actor, but the number of voices I can do, at least in that kind of space, are a little limited. Always want to learn a new thing.
And I think that's the message we should carry forward from the end of this podcast. Go and learn a new thing. Always want to learn a new thing. Always want to learn from the people around you. It's a good message. So, yay! We were moral for once.
If people want to watch your lovely streams or find out more about you more generally, where can they go?
I would be delighted to tell you, darling. So, in general, you can once again hear me as the voice of Captain Oromar Vale on the Campaign Skyjacks podcast. Most of my social media now is actually pretty consistent. So, Twitch, YouTube, itch.io is all under The Neon Caster. My live streaming is a lot of actual play, but also I like Pokemon a lot and JRPGs a lot, and I play that with friends and voice all of the characters as practice, and it's a good time. Yeah, if you'd like to play my tabletop RPGs, they're available at theneoncaster.itch.io. I am currently doing a second edition of Heartbeats in Perfect Sync with a bunch of additional content. That's going to have a physical release in November this year if you're based in the UK, and go to Thought Bubble, the kind of indie press convention in Harrogate. I will be very lucky to get a table at that, and we'll have games available for people to buy there. But yes, in general, if you would like to go and play my tabletop RPGs, then I would be honored if you did. You could obtain that at theneoncaster.itch.io. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. It's been
Thank
wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
I should probably do the sign off. Thank you so much for listening. This has been I'm a Fan of That. I still remain Holly Swinyard, who continues to say nonsense and stupid things continuously. Just as a reminder, you got it at the top of the show, my book is currently available, A History of Fans and Fandom, The Passion and Power of Fan Culture. You can get it anywhere you get books. Please do go and buy that. And I will see you next time.
And I have rolled to determine that I have still been Vivian Asimos. You can go and pre-order my book from Reaction with a K Books. It's Cosplay and the Dressing of Identity. And yeah, thanks.
Until next time, everybody. See ya.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, review, and subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast, and do give it a share. Tell your friends, family, fellow fans. Get the word out however you feel like you can. You can follow us on social media. Links are in the show notes, as well as some links to further reading for anyone who might be interested. Music for this episode was Nowhere Land by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. This episode was produced by Vivian Asimos and Holly Swinyard.